Oh, thanks, Monica. So can everybody see the screen?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. Well, Falcon Lake is down in the southeast corner of Manitoba. It's you can see where the pointer is, the cursor. This basically this area is the traditional territory of the Saulteaux and Ojibwa, territory that was ceded in 1873 under Treaty 3. So we acknowledge this area as traditional land of the Saulteaux and Ojibwa. The story of Falcon Lake certainly goes back thousands of years, and my involvement with it goes back to 1968, when as an undergraduate student at the University of Manitoba, I was asked if I would take on the assessment of the Bill North collection. And Bill North was a provincial government worker who worked on the road crew that pushed the South Shore Drive through the Falcon Lake site. And he collected a number of artifacts during that process of the road building. So in 1968, I put this collection together and assembled it into 4 display cases chronologically, and it ended up being installed at the museum at Lithic Lake in the Whiteshell Provincial Park. We went back in early 1971 and did some test excavation, and then in the summer of 71, we were there for 2 months with a crew of 14. And over the course of 2 years, the material excavated in 1971 was analyzed and documented, and we published a report in 1973. We went back with a crew of 8 in 1973 for 6 weeks and finished up some of the units that hadn't been completed, as well as several new units. That material from the 1973 excavation is pretty much the subject of this report. The problem is in 1973, the funding ran out and sort of never reappeared. So the material from the 1973 excavation was analyzed on a piecemeal basis by myself over the course of 20 years. Completed in 1993, and the material itself was returned to the museum for safekeeping. So this binder of data analysis, line drawings, pen and ink sketches, etc., sat collecting dust in a bottom drawer of a filing cabinet until 2 years ago, when the onset of the COVID pandemic, I decided to see if I could clean out a filing cabinet, and rediscovered this binder of material, and realizing what it was, along with hundreds of slides and photos and images, I felt there was a need to document this material rather than let it sit and collect further dust and go unreported. So that's what I did starting in 2021. Now this area, the topography of this area is Precambrian shield. Many of you are familiar with it, but there's granite outcrops, bedrock. It was what's left of a mountain range that was formed 4.5 billion years ago and has been worn down over the course of some 4.5 billion years. And the outcrops of granite are separated by muskeg and glacial drift. In some cases, the overburden reaches a depth of 20 feet. In other cases, less than that. At the Falcon Lake site, the overburden reaches 6 to 8 feet in some locations. So this is the Whiteshell River system. You can see down the bottom with the little red circle, that's where the Falcon Lake site is. In terms of the geology, there's lots of lava flows, granite, basalt, sedimentary rocks, as well as metamorphosed rock, following the Keewatin series that was identified by Davis in 1954. So you've got quartz, quartzite, schist, diorite, rhyolites exposed. And as luck would have it, the geology department at the University of Manitoba has a field research station up here at Star Lake. So in 1971, we took a large sample of material, artifacts, as well as flakes and debris, to the folks at the geology department, had them identified. So the whole geological classification of the artifactual material is based on the geological classification that was put together by the geology department. So you'll see references to rhyolite and quartzite, as well as diorite, some of the more common ones. And the material from the Falcon Lake site, about 99% of it is all local lithic or stone material. You can see West Hawk Lake here is fairly round. Falcon Lake is linear, as well as Caddy Lake and North Cross, South Cross. This is a result of the retreat of the Wisconsin ice sheet. West Hawk Lake, on the other side, on the other hand, being round, it's about 18 kilometers in diameter. It's 110 meters deep, or 377 feet deep. And it was formed when a meteorite hit that area about 100 million years ago during the Cretaceous. So we know this landform and the bedrock, the exposed bedrock, has been around for at least 100 million years, which is pretty mind-boggling in itself. The vegetation, on the other hand, with the retreat of the ice sheet, one tends to think that it's boreal forest, and actually boreal forest, the southern end of the boreal forest begins at the north end of Caddy Lake. And this whole area, going all the way up into Batula Lake, is protrusion, westward protrusion of the Great Lakes, St. Lawrence forest region, dominated by hardwoods, maple, oak, birch, conifers, as well as cedar. So you'll find on the Mantario Trail, which goes alongside the Manitoba-Ontario border, a large stand of cedar on the east side of West Hawk Lake. Now, boreal forest, on the other hand, as you know, is characterized by black spruce, jack pine, tamarack, aspen, poplar, balsam, birch. And I mentioned the soil in the Falcon Lake site reaches down to about 6 to 8 feet. It's been identified as the Indian Bay Complex, part of the Seven Sisters series, which is a dark gray wooded soil, fine textured lacustrine lake deposit. And on the bottom end, you've got some glacial till gravel deposit on top of the bedrock. In terms of the river system itself, the Falcon Lake site is at the exit of Falcon River. Falcon River flows down to Indian Bay. So it flows south to Indian Bay, and Indian Bay is part of Shoal Lake. Shoal Lake is part of Lake of the Woods, and Lake of the Woods flows north via the Winnipeg River. So you'll see this Whiteshell River system, which starts at West Hawk Lake. You have to portage from Falcon Lake to West Hawk Lake, and West Hawk Lake empties into Caddy Lake, and that's the beginning of the Whiteshell River system, and it flows through South Cross, North Cross, into Saline Lake, etc. Just an indication that Falcon Lake is about 200 kilometers east of Winnipeg. So this is basically what the Falcon Lake area looks like. You can see highway number 1 on the north shore. This is the height of land. The Falcon River flows into Falcon Lake, and then it exits at this west end. As you can see, flows down into Mud Lake. Mud Lake ends up flowing down into Indian Bay, as I said earlier. So this is what the site looks like. You can see that it's pretty close to the shore. These are units 1 through 3 and 4. And you can see this granite outcrop. So you would think, as a number of sites in the Whiteshell and southeastern Manitoba that are in the boreal forest, that once you get down about 10 or 12 inches, you tend to hit bedrock or you tend to hit sterile soil. But here, these units actually went down 28 to 30 centimeters. So that gave us a certain amount of occupational depth that took us right down to paleo level. Generally, the thinking of a lot of archaeologists that have worked in the boreal forest in Manitoba is that every 2 inches of soil, as you go down every 2 inches, you go through about 250 years of occupation. So by going down some 28 to 30 centimeters, we've gone through thousands of years. Again, you can see these are units 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And again, you see the granite outcrop. I'll show you what this particular unit looks like once it's been fully excavated. This is a look at the site from the center of the site. You can see that this particular unit went down roughly about 12 centimeters and was sterile. What's interesting to point out is the mature stand of oak as part of the Great Lakes Forest area. No aspen, beavers have taken them all down. There's no conifer or fir trees in this unit or on the site. This is what the site looks like in the wintertime, and you can see stands of oak, willow, and none of the other vegetation that would be characteristic of boreal forest. This is an indication of the road cut, the road that was put through in 1956. You can see the depth of soil here. It's a day use picnic site. This is a schematic of the units that were excavated. I said 28 centimeters. It's actually 28 inches in units 1, 2, 3, and 7. That's just a copy of the report that was published in 1973. This is from the 1973 excavation. We talked about the lithic, the stone material. You can see most of it is local material: quartz, rhyolite, chert, basalt, quartzite, the rhyolites. You do have the occurrence of some chalcedony. The interesting thing about chalcedony, as opposed to Knife River flint, one of the reports by Bacon in the Minnesota publication, edited by Morrow, Bacon, who's done quite a bit of work on lithic material, has identified chalcedony as appearing in nodules in the glacial drift and deposited with the retreat of the ice sheet. So we consider chalcedony as local material. In fact, I did some work at the Rowley-Hennesett site in Pipestone Creek, Manitoba, and southwest Manitoba. And again, we found chalcedony, a fair bit of it, at that site. Now, Bacon sort of hedges his bets and says, well, this chalcedony that appears in the glacial drift, the nodules of it are kind of small. And, says we don't think that it might have been used in stone tools, although he leaves open the possibility. So, this is a chart that was developed of the artifacts and the type material. So you can see the earliest occupation from the material that was excavated in 1973 is McKean. And the McKean projectile point, you've got one made out of quartzite, one out of diorite. Then you move into your ceramic bearing levels, the first one being laurel. And again, the local material projectile points, bifaces, and scrapers are made out of rhyolite. Similarly, as you move up with Rainy River composite and Sandy Lake. So one of the things that I did, it took a number of months and it was off and on over several years. I know folks have, the archaeology is, you operate on a shoestring budget. This was a no-string budget, and I just volunteered my time. In discussion with some archaeologists in my master's program in the late 70s, we thought, well, lithics, flakes, might tell us a story about something. What we weren't sure. We thought maybe spatially it might identify sort of tool manufacturing areas. On the other hand, we thought vertically, the deposit of lithic stone flakes might tell us something about the occupation level and correlate something to the artifacts that we found. Well, this is the raw data that was analyzed and plotted out, as I said, off and on over several months, over several years, and just by keeping at it. And we ended up with that. And then we took this raw data and plotted it on a graph, which is this, which is quite interesting because here you've got this McKean occupation and you've got this distribution of lithic material, which we think is probably the beginning of laurel. And here we've got what we think is the Rainy River composite. This Whiteshell side notch tends to be associated with laurel pottery. And moving on, Winnipeg River composite. So the lithic flakes analysis has given us some correlation to what the artifacts tell us in terms of occupations. We did a similar thing with rock fragments from the 1973 excavation, and that really other than indicating that it's all local material, it really hasn't said a whole heck of a lot in terms of vertical distribution. So then we looked at the pottery, the ceramics. The interesting thing about the ceramics is back in 1973, we utilized the McNish classification scheme. And then when I re-examined the binder, rather than use that classification scheme, it was brought to my attention a number of other classification schemes have been put forward, including the Rainy River Composite by Brian Lenius and Dave Olenek. So I went through that document several times and then contacted Brian and Dave and had a number of communications with them and shared a number of these images. And thanks to Paul Harrison, who took all the slides and other images and can digitize them, put them into a digital format, which took a fair bit of time. So we were able to share these images, not the actual material, but the images, and then reassess the ceramics. So this is what we have in terms of the ceramics from the 1973 excavation. This planeware is generally associated with laurel. Most of these design motifs are all laurel. So the earliest ceramics at the site is laurel. Then we took a look at the species of animals that were found at the site. Some 43 species of animals that were faunal remains were sorted by occupation. So there were no actual counts or numbers. We couldn't identify the number of animals, but we did identify this was done by Jack Dubois and George Lammers at the Manitoba Museum. The interesting thing is, if you look at the paleo level, the earliest level, you tend to think of them as sort of big game hunters, and we do have Bison occidentalis that was found in the road cut. But we also have beaver, and the interesting thing is beaver occurs in all of the occupations of this site. As well as, in the early paleo level, we have cottontail, snowshoe hare, and we have snapping turtle and identification of fish, likely sturgeon. So there's a variety of game that is being procured by this occupation. You have a similar presentation with McKean. When you move into laurel, what we see is an increase in terms of aquatic resources, fisher, marten, otter, as well as beaver, and several species of fish. Similarly, you have further aquatic resources with Rainy River Composite and Sandy Lake and Winnipeg River. So the thinking is that according to the Canadian Museum of History, you have the introduction of the canoe somewhere around 3,000 years ago, which would put that somewhere around the occurrence of laurel. And I would submit that the introduction of the canoe allowed for a greater acquisition of aquatic resources by that population. And generally, it would be the introduction of the vehicle to allow you to travel the waterway more so than in a paleo occupation or a McKean occupation. Coupled to that is the introduction of the bow and arrow as well. The interesting thing is in the Laurel occupation, you also have the occurrence of bird. You have an occurrence of bird, small sample in McKean, bird occurrence of bird remains in Laurel, and certainly an increase in the faunal remains of bird in Rainy River Composite and Sandy Lake and Winnipeg River Composite. So to me, this is indicative that the migratory waterfowl, if you look at their characteristics, they shed their flight feathers for 6 to 8 weeks. So they're stuck out, they tend to stay out in the middle of the lake. And they could be obtained by way of tossing nets from canoes. And that would give an indication of a procurement strategy during the ceramic bearing occupations. So this is the sequence from Minnesota in Morrow's book. And I would submit that the sequence for Falcon Lake tends to reflect the sequence for the Northern Plains. We don't have any dates from the Falcon Lake site, which is another thing that, budgetary restraints prohibited radiocarbon dating. There must be 50 or 60 carbon samples still there in storage. So there's a possibility that some dates can be obtained from Falcon Lake. So this is sequence and the time period for Falcon Lake. In the report, all these are converted to BCE and BC. Anyways, this is basically the sequence. This Manitoba type was identified by Leo Petitpas in 2013. So 1973, it was pretty costly to put any photographs in an archaeological publication. So they were all pen and ink sketches. So this is what the photograph of what was plate 4 in the 73 excavation. You can see this is copper trade, projectile point, plain side notch, sturgeon triangular. This is out of a, looks like Knife River flint, but it's could be chalcedony. This is this Manitoba point, which is a gray-green rhyolite. So it's been identified as an Angostura variant. Then in 2013, Leo Petitpas from Provincial archaeologist in a publication in 2013 identified it as a Manitoba point. So that's basically what we have. This is another black and white photo of it, which so this is during this paleo period. After Faulkner's report, this is what we figure went on as mixed parkland. And it was probably Falcon Lake was probably just either a small river, something. It wasn't as large as it is now with the boreal forest farther north. So this is the McKean Point, quartzite, level I. And the interesting thing is, in terms of the geology of the area, I should mention that there was a gold rush into the east end of Falcon Lake in the 1890s. And there was gold-bearing veins of quartz that folks were after. So that whole east end of Falcon Lake is staked out and into mining claims. And there's overgrown mine shafts and trenches. And on a reconnaissance mission, A couple of guys fell into a trench, but were uninjured because they fell onto a slag pile, which broke their fall. Anyways, that's the story of gold-bearing quartz. We didn't find any in any of our material, but we did find that. So this is the retreat of Glacial Lake Agassiz about 8,000 years ago, flowing east via the Winnipeg River system. And this is it about 7,500 years ago. So once you get into the Keene, you've got a mixed hardwood vegetation. And this is the occurrence distribution of the McKean complex occupation. This is just an indication of later Shield Archaic, which is farther north. Interestingly enough, we found this copper knife that is only about, I think it's about 4.5, 5 inches below the surface. And we sent it off to Pinawa, Atomic Energy Commission at Pinawa, to have it analyzed, mass spectroscopy. They took a little sliver out of the blade, and they identified it as natural copper, but it had been hot hammered. So unlike the old copper complex, which did not have this feature, this particular knife has a feature being hot hammered. The form is much the same, and it kind of looks like a butter knife. And in the publication by Bow, who identifies copper knives and included this one, this is the first picture of this knife that has ever seen the light of day. So the knives that are in the reference book by Bow are pointed. So they look like they've been worn down. They look more like a paring knife, whereas this kind of looks more like a butter knife. So this may be sort of the pristine version of this old copper knife form. So this is the photograph from Pinawa. As you can see, this is where they took out the thin section for analysis. This is the Whiteshell side notch point that's associated more with Laurel. These are the plain side notch projectile points in Eastern Triangle. When it comes to the ceramics, this was originally in the 73 publication identified as Manitoba horizontal. But in consultation with Brian Lenius and Dave Olenek, we've determined that this is a variant of Rainy River composite. So that's the reconstructed vessel. This was identified as black duck and is still identified as black duck. Sandy Lakeware. This is what the soil profiles look like across the site. You can see the granite outcrops. This is Unit 1. And you can see that, you know, we went down 28 inches. This large boulder here has been left by the Wisconsin glaciation. We figure it probably, estimates are from geologists and others, it's granite and it probably weighs about 2.5 tons. And so on the bottom, it's sitting on bedrock, but there's a thin 2-inch lens of gravel, probably glacial till. Same with these boulders here, they're all deposited by the Wisconsin ice sheet during its retreat. So not necessarily nice round boulders left by the ice sheet. So that basically covers the presentation of Falcon Lake.